I'm super excited to continue our training on PPP loan fraud, managing government investigations, why so many good people who did not have bad intentions are becoming immersed in the criminal justice system. So to help guide this process, I'm going to rely on a blog. Our team wrote at prisonprofessors.com, and I encourage anyone to visit Prison Professors. All of the content is free. The only investment is your time and willingness to embrace strategies that can help manage a government investigation, or, and a lot of people come to our work, how to avoid a government investigation by way of a lot of our compliance training of understanding how every decision we make influences our lives moving forward. By the way, I spent time yesterday with my business partner at a conference, and someone asked him a book that he would recommend reading. It was a great answer, so I'm going to recommend it to all of you. Michael referenced the book called 10-10-10, which was written by Susie Welch, Jack Welch, the former CEO's wife. And in the book 10-10-10, as I recall, it's understanding how every decision you make will influence your life in 10 minutes, 10 months, 10 years. It could be 10 weeks, 10 months, and 10 years. I think you get the idea. If people can embrace decision-making from that perspective, they may not give into temptation. They may give more thought to how their actions will influence the rest of their life, because as we transition into this screen share and get into navigating loan fraud cases, we could argue that a number of people who succumb to temptation and make some bad choices were not thinking about how their actions would influence their life in the weeks, months, years to come. And if they did, they might have made different decisions. So as we continue, we know by way of previous videos that the Department of Justice continues to target business owners receiving government relief, COVID-19 stimulus checks and loans. At this time, there are thousands of open criminal investigations and prosecutions based on loans under the federal Paycheck Protection Program. Congress has already flagged billions of dollars in PPP loans as suspicious. As a result, the DOJ continues to hire dozens of prosecutors to specifically pursue cases of PPP loan fraud. I'm going to talk about the stakeholders again, and you're going to probably think, Justin, you address this in every video. Is there a need to address it again? Probably, I think, or else I wouldn't say it, because it is such a big deal. Hardly a day passes without our team receiving a call from someone saying, I didn't have bad intentions. Why are they making an example out of me? The money they're talking about is a rounding hole compared to what the government wastes and blows every single second of every single day. Why are they coming after me? Well, there are a number of reasons, including deterrence, holding people who break the law accountable. I got into, I don't want to say a mini argument with someone who was essentially, well, he was yelling at me by asking or yelling at me, wanting to know why, if he paid back all of the money in a PPP fraud case, if it was all paid back, why the government was still asking for 24 months in prison, yelling at me, all the money's been paid back, all the money's been paid back, all the money's been paid back. This is ridiculous. There's no loss. If anything, I'm the victim here because this is detracting from my life and family. I paid the money back. I paid the money back. He said it repeatedly, and I listened patiently, and I responded by helping him understand the stakeholders. A prosecutor's out to advance his career. I'm not saying they're unjust, but they do want to advance their career, and that includes trying to get guideline sentences. Further, I reminded him that a federal judge, upon my release from prison, I attended a sentencing hearing, and the federal judge told a defendant who went on, and his lawyer, who went on and on and on and on about how the money had been paid back. The judge put up his hand, said, sit down. Can I speak now? Both the defense attorney and lawyer, both the defense attorney and defendant said, yes, Your Honor. And the judge very quietly and politely said, did you know, if you rob a bank, and an hour later, you go and return all the ones, hundreds, and fives, did you know that you've still robbed a bank? Did you know that's still a crime? So are you telling me that because you stole the money and somehow raised the money to pay it back, money you probably owe to somebody, that you shouldn't go to prison? That doesn't seem fair, does it? You rob a bank, you give the money back, you still robbed a bank. So you have to understand the stakeholders. Giving all the money back doesn't change that you may go to prison. They are out for justice, and in many cases to advance their career. And judges, by way of sentencing fairness, want to treat everyone the same way as best they possibly can. Our team hears every single day, we've heard a lot of this in the PPP stuff, gave all of the money back. Why am I still going to prison? I think I just addressed that. So anyone's receiving a PPP loan fraud should stay tuned to this. If you're an accountant, if you're a lawyer, if you're a family member who may have signed some forms, not fully understanding what you're signing, you should take notice, because if you've signed it, they're going to hold you accountable. I'm not insinuating you've done anything wrong. What our team is trying to do is help ensure you avoid any ensnarement in the criminal justice system or from a government investigator, because it will wreck you're weak. The target of any government investigation, as you know, should be to be proactive in mitigating the short and long-term impacts that accompany such investigation. So in this course on PPP loan fraud and professionals, I'm sharing some examples of some defendants who are getting mitigated much shorter sentences. In fact, I'm going to touch on one here in a moment who is a client of our firm. Why are some getting shorter versus longer prison terms? In many cases, it comes down to the mitigation. When I was a stockbroker a long time ago, we met with a banker who told us early in his career, a mistake he made was doubling down on bad loans that he made. In other words, he'd give a business a $250,000 loan. It didn't go well. Instead of stopping the bleeding, not making matters worse, when the small business owner would come back in for a loan, the lender would say, well, I'd give them more money because I wanted to justify the initial loan. I figured they could make it. I didn't want to, I wanted to give them another chance. We believed in it initially. They just needed a little bit more capital to make it work. And in the end, he said, I became a better funder when I stopped throwing good money after bad. Because he also said the majority of people he continued to fund who struggled, he continued to give money to, were not successful. To use this analogy, if you've made a bad decision, don't make matters worse. Don't throw good money after bad, giving more money to lawyers, spinning tails. You want to stop the bleeding. You've got to cut your losses. But too many people who become immersed in a government investigation, if they've done it, we're not lawyers here, and I'm not advising anyone not to go to trial if they're innocent. But I do think the statistics are compelling. The amount of people who get into trouble, plead guilty, and the majority of people who go to trial are convicted and go to prison and get a longer prison term in many cases because of what people would argue is a trial tax. Exercising your right to go to trial, the government is going to exercise their right to ask for a much larger prison term. So if, God forbid, you or someone you know, or if you're an accountant, a client of yours has gotten into trouble, or if you have anyone, don't double down. Do not make matters worse. You've got to stop the bleeding. So in this video, I'm going to touch on some very basic strategies that someone could pursue if you, or if, God forbid, you're involved in a government investigation. Because, of course, as we write here, it can make a significant difference in the overall results. In this video, we're also going to discuss 5 strategic steps to follow in responding to any loan fraud investigation and prosecution to improve outcomes. Recently, our team advised a client facing a 12-year sentence for wire fraud. After working with us, this client received a 37-month sentence. He went on to serve 10 months in federal prison and is now thriving. I will close with this case study and address why he went from 12 years to 37 months and also how he was able to get released very early. Like any investigation, loan fraud investigations present a range of potential outcomes. Sometimes it may be possible to avoid criminal charges or prison altogether. How could someone avoid criminal charges? Well, there are times where you can self-report. If a mistake was made, if you signed a document that you learned was fraudulent and just not truthful, and it led to resources coming your way, you could if you choose, you could choose to hire a lawyer, draw a line in the sand, make it clear there were no bad intentions. You want to pay the money back. You didn't fully understand. You made a mistake. The motives here matter. And part of the reason that people have gotten different sentences in PPP cases is what did they do with the money? There are some people who just received the money and bought Lamborghinis and Rolexes and Patek Philippe watches, if I say that correctly, and just traveled the world, spending lavishly. Those sorts of people who had no business, no intentions to use the money to run a business are getting measurably longer sentences than people who had an existing business, might have fudged on the application a little bit to help keep the business afloat, but they weren't necessarily spending the money on Rolexes and Lamborghinis. The motives behind choices really matter. So a good mitigation strategy always includes telling the story from the stakeholder, from the defendant's perspective. So if you, for example, are a defendant in a criminal case, any type of case, the onus is on you to articulate how it happened, what you've learned from it, what you're doing to remedy it, to fix things. A number of defendants simply rely on their counsel, and you should rely on your lawyer and work openly with your lawyer. But as federal judges have told us, lawyers are paid to talk about why you're worthy of leniency. If you're a bad dad, I hate to say it, the lawyers are paid to say you're a good dad. If you have had prior experiences that were somewhat unethical or dishonest, they're paid to say that it was out of character or aberrational, but you're really a strong, successful executive, full of integrity and character. It may be true. It may not be true. I don't know you. What I know is the lawyers are paid to say it. What that means is you've got to do the mitigation. You've got to articulate what you've learned and the motivations behind your conduct. And of course, if you're able to do that, the judge is able to see you for who you are in your own words, presuming you're authentic and not spinning tails and not lying or excusing or rationalizing. You don't want to make matters worse, coming back to the loan officer, doubling down on loans he knew were bad, hoping he'd make up for it or hit a home run. Continuing on, triggers for PPP loan fraud investigations. Several government agencies investigate PPP loan fraud. The Small Business Administration is the primary agency dispersing loans and is the lead investigator in many cases. The FBI, Department of Justice, and the Treasury Department are also investigating. As mentioned in a prior video, President Biden addressed the priority of PPP investigations during his State of the Union. A special prosecutor is being appointed. So it's really all hands on deck. Any of the following can trigger a PPP loan fraud investigation: misuse of the loan proceeds, false application documents, multiple applications for PPP loans, bank's report of suspicious transactions, whistleblower reports, random audits. Of the people that our team has worked with and have gotten the majority of calls from, it's really been the false application documents and just fudging here or there a little bit, and the problem with this, and part of the reason these sorts of defendants have gotten longer prison term, is because when you're just creating fake documents, that's fraud. If you're making up what your tax return, what your income was in the prior year, or what your payroll was, or how many employees you have, that's criminal type stuff. That really takes thinking, and then it's very difficult to cover it up, and you've forgotten what you've done, and you create another document that's false on top of the other one. And before you know it, you've just lied, and you don't know where it starts and where it ends. So in our experience thus far at Prison Professors, White Collar Advice, Compliance Mitigation, the false application documents leading to these loans has been by far the most cases we've received. Alleged misuse of loan proceeds is rampant. And of course, once they get the proceeds, they're misusing the loan proceeds. It's kind of one and then another, but it's starting with the false application. Alleged misuse of loan proceeds is rampant in the criminal cases filed so far. The government designed the loan program for specific and limited business purposes, primarily to cover employee payroll during the pandemic. The use of loan proceeds to buy cars, vacations, or similar non-business item presents serious issues that often violate the PPP loan program. Also, some business owners mistakenly believe they can borrow money from their business after receiving a PPP loan, intending to replace it in the future. However, to government investigators, such actions show fraudulent intent in obtaining the loan. So in other words, you get a loan for $1 million. You say, well, this is great. I'm going to take 600 of it, borrow 600 of it to do this. I'm simply going to pay it back with revenues that come in the future. And that's a big no-no. If you read the loan agreement, and as we just articulated, that was not the purpose of the loan. Likewise, the government is targeting business owners who pay themselves distributions after receiving loans. The government expects strict compliance with the intended use of proceeds. Bank reports of suspicious transactions provide another trigger for investigators. Financial institutions must file the suspicious activity report with the Treasury Department under certain conditions. A suspicious activity report is a document that banks must file with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network whenever they suspect money laundering or fraud. Unusual account activity after receiving a PPP loan will be flagged for FINCEN. Suspicious activity reports help the government monitor activity that is out of the ordinary. I suppose you get $1 million and your average transaction is $3,000 or $5,000 or $10,000 at the bank, and just like that, you're withdrawing $100,000 and moving money around. It could lead to some suspicious activity and a trigger. And even if you have good intentions and if there's nothing wrong, still triggering an audit and a government investigator just exposes you to a whole slew of problems that could really derail and wreck your week and month and year. Coming back to the Susie Welch analogy, 10, 10, 10. Every decision you're making, 10 minutes, 10 weeks, 10 years, think about that as you apply for a loan, as you allocate the money. Whistleblowers, of course, can also trigger a PPP loan fraud investigation. Our team did have a client who was turned in by, as I recall, an executive within the company who had been fired, supposedly for fraud. The person who was fired didn't think that she had done anything wrong as either punishment or retribution, or in her case, doing what she thought was the right thing. She picked up the phone and called the Department of Justice and to reported her boss or former employer or boss who she felt who had misrepresented or misused and lied to obtain a PPP fraud, and it was horrific. So that leads into a whole nother conversation about whistleblowers. I mean, they really are the new corporate watchdog. Whistleblowers can be incentivized, can be rewarded. I believe it was the Sarbanes-Oxley Act that can reward whistleblowers. If you do a simple Google search of rewards for whistleblowers, wow, it is massive. Some whistleblowers have come into tens of millions of dollars, in some cases more than $100 million by blowing the whistle. That was done in part because for decades, whistleblowers were treated as pariahs. They were ostracized, they were demoted, they were fired, they were transferred. There was real punishment. It was Warren Bennis, the famed USC professor who died a few years ago, who wrote a wonderful book he wrote dozens of books. He wrote a book called On Leadership, and there's a great line in there that says, if you whistleblow, make sure you have another job lined up. So for that reason, the government, to the extent they can, is rewarding whistleblowers to report wrongdoing, though from what we know, the lion's share of whistleblowers are not rewarded or lauded, or they don't go on podcasts and TV, as was like the Elizabeth Holmes case. Those whistleblowers have been on CNBC, they're writing books, they're on podcasts. Yes, there's inconvenience of having to testify during their trial, but they're really lauded as heroes, someone of integrity and character for calling out wrongdoing and doing the right thing. It's really an advancement of their career because they're known for doing the right thing and standing up in the face of adversity. And in the Holmes case, very tough bosses. But the majority of people are not rewarded that way by getting book deals and whatnot. The majority of people are demoted, and to the extent the government can incentivize them to tell the truth, they're going to. My point is, our team has received a lot of clients by someone by being turned in by a whistleblower. The federal government, as I just mentioned, offers an incentive for blowing the whistle on fraud against taxpayer-funded programs, such as the PPP. The False Claims Act allows successful whistleblowers to receive up to 30% of any money the U.S. government recovers. Quick fact, there are people who have actually gone to prison who have gone to prison and still been credited for blowing the whistle. Bradley Birkenfeld, former broker at UBS, where I used to work, blew the whistle on UBS. He ended up getting like 4 or 5 years in prison, I believe, but he blew the whistle and came in, I think it was more than $100 million. A lot of people would say, I'll do 4 years in jail for $100 million. You can still blow the whistle and be found criminally negligent and go to prison. Very interesting. There are some people who may think if I blow the whistle, it may absolve me from my conduct. That's a big no. If you're involved, you're involved. They're going to find out. Again, it's not doubling down and making matters worse like so many people do. If a business owner receives a PPP loan primarily to cover payroll and does not do so, employees will be motivated to blow the whistle. Sure, it's like, hey, we just got $250,000 to pay payroll. However, I'm short this week. I'm not going to be able to pay you. Yet everyone knows that you got this money sitting in the bank and you're driving in with a new car. That's going to upset people when you impact their self-interest, their livelihood, and their ability to pay their rent or mortgage. Business owners should be aware of random audits as well. Given the number and dollar volume of PPP loans dispersed during the pandemic, the government has implemented various random audit initiatives. Up to now, the DOJ has shown little tolerance towards misuse of loan proceeds or false information on PPP loan documents. We expect to see a very aggressive DOJ quickly filing hundreds of criminal cases in the coming months. The DOJ is looking to make an example out of anyone trying to take advantage of emergency government relief in the middle of a pandemic. Continuing, formal charges in PPP loan fraud cases. Those under investigation for PPP loan fraud charges such as bank fraud, mail fraud, wire fraud, making false statements to financial institutions, and money laundering. The DOJ seeks significant prison terms plus criminal fines and repayment of the PPP loan. Formal charges in these cases most often come from secret grand jury proceedings. The grand jury, a group of regular citizens from many walks of life, teachers, firefighters, and retirees, investigates potential criminal conduct under the leadership of a prosecutor. A grand jury may subpoena physical evidence or a person to testify. In PPP loan fraud cases, bank statements, loan documents, receipts, and the like are available to substantiate misuse of funds, unapproved expenses, and distributions. Prosecutors do not present countervailing facts to the grand jury. They control the narrative and focus only on the evidence that supports criminal charges. It is important to note that ignorance of the law is not a defense to a criminal charge. So, for example, even if a business owner did not know that it is improper to use PPP loan proceeds for partner distributions or to borrow money from the business, that is not a valid defense. Moreover, prosecutors will use owner distributions or extravagant spending as evidence of a predisposition for fraud. In most cases, people remain unaware that an investigation is underway or that a grand jury might even be considering criminal charges. This further limits people's ability to offer rebuttal evidence early on. Most defendants learn of the charges against them only when arrested or formally charged, like when the Fed show up at your home at 6 a.m. with guns and a helicopter above you and you're on the nightly news and you're like, I didn't see this coming. What happened? Why didn't they just call me? Why are they making a big show out of this? Again, it's understanding the stakeholders. Mitigating exposure. Are you a business owner worried about exposure to PPP loan fraud investigation? In that case, we recommend 5 steps that could really make the difference between probation or an 11-year prison sentence a Texas man just received for PPP loan fraud. The DOJ is aggressively pressing for significant prison terms in the vast majority of these cases. Anecdotally, 36 to 41 months is a common sentence in PPP loan fraud cases. Practically speaking, if you had a 36-month sentence, federal prison sentence, the day you show up, you are given 15% good time credit. So 36 months is 31 months with good time. There may be programs that you can participate in that can get you out of prison earlier. But generally speaking, on a 36-month sentence, the average time on the inside could range from 11 to 12 months, all the way to 25 or 26 months, depending on program adjustment in prison and making sure you don't lose that good time the day you show up. Of course, the first step in mitigating exposure is to be proactive and be honest. Concerned owners should be proactive. Start by taking an honest and realistic assessment of the situation. Many people believe they may be at risk of a PPP loan fraud investigation, but choose to hide their heads in the sand. That's not a good strategy. It leaves them reactive, not proactive, I can assure you. Participants should assess whether there is a profit distribution or non-business expense that the government might consider questionable. There are many more options to deal with the problem at the outset of an investigation. In some cases, there may be an opportunity to provide information before an investigation begins, commonly referred to as a proffer. Other options might include deferred prosecution or non-prosecution agreements. There may be an opportunity to pay the PPP loan fraud back. If an investigation is underway, counsel may be able to work out a pre-indictment agreement. We encourage you to speak to experienced counsel and consultants. An honest assessment of the situation to realize where you are. If you're going to hire a lawyer and make that investment, they need to know everything. A lot of defendants feign ignorance or deny and dodge and don't fully come clean. And your lawyer is unable to help you if that's the case. So we strongly recommend you retain a lawyer. You can obtain attorney-client privilege when you retain that lawyer, so you'll be able to say and do anything. You really want someone who specializes in fraud and wire fraud and mail fraud and money laundering. It doesn't have to be specific PPP. If they handle white-collar crimes, and many of them have been former U.S. attorneys and they understand the whole workings of the criminal justice system, they're going to help you. Some lawyers, of course, are marketing themselves as specific PPP loan fraud experts. If you have a lawyer that understands fraud and the sentencing guidelines and mitigation, it's going to accomplish the same thing. Our team at Prison Professors, of course, works with a lot of defendants and lawyers going through these processes. Talking to sentencing mitigation consultants are step 3. Having a sentencing mitigation team from the outset can certainly improve the outcome. However, many clients opt for consulting experts later in the process. In other words, after they've been sentenced, what can I do to get out of prison earlier? What can I do to get more halfway house time? Our experience tells us the earlier in the process someone can hire a lawyer, begin to mitigate with our team or someone akin that they think is able to help them, the better they're going to be, because it comes back to what I said earlier in this video of understanding the stakeholders. Mitigation, it means to improve or weaken, to improve the situation. Only you can do that work. Your lawyer will help, but you've got to take the lead. So earlier in this video, I mentioned our client who got somewhere up here, got 37 months when the government asked for 12 years. And that's a huge gap, right? Well, think about why. Rather than wait to get sentenced, the day he learned that he was the target of an investigation, he began to mitigate. He began to proactively show why he was different than the government's version of events. Because at sentencing, they tried to portray him as some mastermind and career criminals. And he also went to trial, who exploits others for his own gain and takes advantage of people for his own gain, and did not address the fact that he had run a very successful business, still does, had employed hundreds of people, given back significantly to his community over the years. He had a competing message. His lawyer could have shared that message, and his lawyer did. But the reason that it was most impactful, and part of the reason he mitigated his sentence so well, is because, one, I think the judge felt asking for 12 years was utterly absurd. That was a big mistake. Sometimes when you overreach and ask for too much, it can be off-putting. That actually helped him. I think they asked for such a long sentence. But also the judge was able to see that he has a business and he does employ people, and he is a person of character. And while he made some bad decisions, in the totality of his life, he's made a lot of good decisions. And most importantly, as we speak to mitigation, I think the most important thing, the judge knows he's not going to return to the courtroom as another defendant. Judges don't want to look stupid or foolish. I mean, that happens every now and again. They give someone a lenient sentence, and then just like that, they're back in that courtroom and they say, you made me look stupid. You embarrassed me. Now I'm really going to punish you. So good mitigation that only a defendant can do articulates how and why he or she will never return to another courtroom. And a big way to advance that agenda is through writing, is through the way in which you communicate, the way that you put pen to paper and write. Our team can help. If you're able to do it, you should. Frequently what our team says is, whether our team helps or you do it, it's the next right thing to do. If you have become involved in a PPP loan fraud investigation, or if you're a lawyer advising people traversing this process, they've got to invest the time to understand how the hell they got here and why they'll never return. So our client who got 37 months and who will be home in 11 months or 10 months was able to, from the beginning, articulate these very salient points. And he did through the probation interview, which led to a very favorable report, which led to the judge reading, of course, the PSR and commenting on it at sentencing. So you're always looking to influence the stakeholders. Here I go again with the stakeholders: probation officer, prosecutor, FBI agent, pretrial services officer, case manager in prison, judge, probation officer on the other side, bureaucrat that works in the halfway house. You're always seeking to influence these people. Continuing, step 4 in managing a PPP loan fraud investigation: creating a post-sentencing strategy. When sentenced to a prison term, there are still many strategies to implement after the sentencing hearing to lower the time away from home in federal prison. For example, some clients get 37, 40 months in prison. There are programs that can take up to a year off your federal prison term, presuming it's disclosed properly. Issues of alcohol or drinking or whatnot are disclosed appropriately in the probation report. No lying, they're going to see through it. I can assure you the government will see through it. They're not dumb. But there are strategies that begin to get out of prison early, but it really begins with what you do once you get into trouble. So for example, a number of people who go to prison want to get out early by way of this drug program. And some people legitimately have drug problems or drinking problems, but they never disclosed it. That's been the case with some PPP clients. People who reached out to us like, hey, I'm going to prison in 2 weeks for 36 months for a PPP fraud case. I just heard about this early release program. My lawyer didn't tell me about it. Can I get into it? And we look at what they did early on from the early days and weeks of the investigation, and they didn't disclose it properly. And now they're going to try to get into a program. They'll probably be unsuccessful, and it looks sort of inauthentic. And you have a government bureaucrat or a case manager in prison saying, you don't really have a drinking problem. You only want to get out of prison early. This is why it comes back to what you do in the early days matters as much as more than what you'll do after sentencing, because what you do today sets the stage for that. It's akin to a person who wants to run a marathon. This is March 22, wants to run a marathon on July 22. You don't start working on the marathon the week before. If you do, you ain't going to finish. You work on it today, tomorrow, leading up to it, so you're prepared. It's no different. Number 5, take charge of reentry plans. People can bounce back from a criminal conviction and prison term. Success upon reentry is possible. Of course it's possible, but it's not going to happen by happy talk or defaulting to, it is what it is. I'm a convicted felon. No one will hire me. I didn't have bad intentions. I didn't mean to end up here. Those are things that I said when I went to prison, and it certainly didn't endear people to want to help me or grow my network. I just sound like a complaining little baby. In order to overcome, it starts with understanding how and why you got here, really improving your communication skills. People who are involved in PPP loan fraud investigations, it's like, I identify success 5 and 10 years out, coming back to that Susie Welch book, and then making it happen. Like the person training for the marathon in July, they got a plan to run 5 miles every single day this week or whatever it may be. No different. If you're a convicted felon, if you're going to prison, I can assure you life on the other side will be harder if you've wasted your prison term. Life will be harder on the other side if you don't have a network, a job lined up, your reputation intact, because you may have these horrific Department of Justice press releases that castigate you as a common criminal. So your reentry plan, like your mitigation plan, begins the day you learn that you're a target, the day that you get into trouble. So many people are so fixated on the prison sentence and the idea of going to prison, they don't focus on other things that are just as important, which is, what do you do on the other side? There are people who get the outcome they want at sentencing, whether it's probation or home confinement or a very short prison term, and they're like, oh my God, what do I do now? I'm not ready. I can no longer be an accountant. I can no longer be a lawyer. This PPP loan fraud investigation led to a conviction. I owe $1 million to the Department of Justice Financial Litigation Unit. Maybe I should have gotten a year in prison to try to figure it out. Learn from these stories. If you unfortunately become immersed in a government investigation of someone you know, becomes immersed in a government investigation or a PPP loan fraud investigation, what you do today will influence how productively you live, how well you work with your lawyer, how you manage your health, the sentence, your prison term, and of course, coming home with a plan. I'm very grateful you've taken the time to engage in our continuing series on PPP loan fraud investigations. I know my colleague Michael Santos has filmed similar type videos, but we have different perspectives and different, not so much different advice, but we see it differently and want to update and provide this content to all of you with hopes that you'll do better. And if you are unfortunately going through the system, or if you are looking for compliance and training and understanding how good people end up here, we hope you will continue to come back. Again, my name is Justin Paperny, and I'm very grateful for your attention. And I look forward to returning in our series on PPP loan fraud. Bye-bye.